It's our first regular season mailbag episode of the year on Locked On Braves. Myself and Grant McCauley will be answering a wide range of your Twitter questions, including questions about Dansby Swanson, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Spencer Strider. Should be a very fun and exciting episode on Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day, and where me and Grant McCauley do the Braves postcast after each and every game. So make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube. I am your host, Jake Mastroianni. You can follow me on Twitter at shortstopball. You can check out my bio there to see everywhere I am covering the game of baseball, including the Atlanta Braves over at tomahawktake.com. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to Locked On Braves on YouTube as well. And thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. We post episodes daily, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and we are free and available on all platforms. Got a very exciting episode today, doing a mailbag with myself and Grant. Before we get into that, though, I want to let you know this episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. This Mother's Day, and give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off $500 spent when you use code LOCKEDON at checkout. And this will be our first mailbag episode of the regular season, as the Atlanta Braves finally have an off day. And joining me to help answer these questions is the co-host of Locked On Sports Atlanta Postcast, Grant McCauley. Grant, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, here we are back again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun doing the postcast over on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Again, going to continue to plug that. If you haven't already, make sure you go subscribe to that. You can also hear the postcast in audio platform on the Locked On Braves podcast feed as well. But we are going to be doing a mailbag episode today. Got a lot of great questions that we're going to try to get to. Going to get to as many as I can. If I don't get to all of them, I'll answer them on Friday's episode as well. Before we get into the questions, though, Grant, I wanted to just briefly, and I mean briefly, talk about the 5-1 loss to the Dodgers on a Wednesday afternoon. And again, there's already a postcast up with me and Grant talking about that game if you want to give that a listen. But wanted to just mention it here again. Just an ugly game all around from the Braves. Offense did not look very good, but you take a step back and look at the big picture, Grant. You know, it's a 3-4 West Coast trip against two really good teams at the end of a 14-game stretch to start the season. So again, kind of like we mentioned on the postcast, not really trying to make excuses here, but you know, again, big picture, 3-4 on a West Coast trip, not the worst thing in the world.
No, and we've seen worse Braves road trips than this one, most certainly. But I do feel like by the time you've played 14 consecutive games to open the season, and oh, by the way, your gift for all of that as you wrap it up is going to LA to play the Dodgers, where you have won exactly one series since the year 2012. So you got a decade's worth of trips out there. You've won one series, and the Braves had a chance to win a series on Wednesday. It just didn't work out. Charlie Morton was a little bit off. The Braves offense was a lot bit off. So just stuff that didn't come together for the Braves on that day. And, I guess at some point you figure that this stuff evens out. We've learned that the Braves have beaten the Dodgers in Atlanta several times. They beat them in a very notable series last October. So it's a little bit early in the season to take too much out of a trip and losing to the Dodgers like this, but 3-4 on the road trip, that I think you can accept. I think the Braves would have probably liked to have been something like 5-2 on their homestand, and that might have taken a lot of the sting off of an under 500 road trip. But 14 games in 14 days, that's a tall order to start the season. None of the Braves are going to enjoy their Thursday off day for sure.
Yeah, and so are we, because now we get to do a mailbag episode. I know there are a lot of questions out there after the 14 game stretch to start the season. So let's dive into some of these. First one coming from Austin Webb. This question coming from that previous series. He says, was the first game of the Braves Dodgers set mismanaged by bringing in Newcomb when only down by 3? He says, I know my take. I was at the game, turned to my brother and said, Snicker's done it again. Supposed to be bringing in one of our best relievers here. And Grant, I know we touched on this a little bit on the postcast, but I know you have some feelings about this as well. So what was your take on Snitker going to Sean Newcomb there in that spot with the game, still in hand? I know it was early on, but definitely still a game the Braves could have come back and won.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect to see that bullpen door swing open and AJ Minter and Will Smith and Tyler Matzek, one of those guys to walk out there necessarily right there at that point in the game. But you do have enough relievers at this point, and you really were able to rest them up in the finale in San Diego because Spencer Strider really saved the bullpen. So I felt like you have a little bit of latitude. I know it's the first game of the 3 game series. I know that we're not managing in October, we're managing in April, and I know that workloads are a big deal, and I know that a lot of times, as I've come to have a lot of discussions with folks in and around the Braves, you don't always know everything that's going on with every single reliever on a daily basis, and they're certainly not going to allow that to come out and be common knowledge so that the other team knows, oh well, they're trying to stay away from this guy, this guy, and this guy. I mean, I guess that you can kind of get it through process of elimination, but I'm not surprised because Snit's obviously an old school type manager, and he's going to think about his high leverage relievers in the middle to late innings, and it was a little bit earlier than that. But I feel like this is why you go out and you get a Darren O'Day, because he's not necessarily looked upon as a guy that needs to throw the 7th or the 8th or the 9th. He's kind of a utility type reliever that if you run into a problem in the 4th inning or the 5th inning and you need to get a couple of tough outs, I think Darren O'Day is the kind of reliever that you would throw in there, whether it's a righty or a lefty. It just so happened to be Freddie Freeman, so I understood why Sean Newcomb, the left-hander, came in to face a left-handed hitter, but that's just not a matchup that felt great to me. I know that Newcomb's since been designated for assignment. We'll see what his future is, whether it's with the Braves or somewhere else, but I think that that's kind of the frustration is we're also coming out of, a time in which we saw the Braves bullpen be such a pivotal part of all the success the Braves had in October. So to watch a game against a club you just saw in October, one that you feel like it hasn't gotten away from you yet, get a little bit wider, as far as a lead for the Dodgers was concerned on that night, I understand the frustrations. And Sean Newcomb, as I said on the Braves postcast, is not the guy I would have called upon in that spot. And I understand staying away from the bigger guys, but you have other options out there. And I feel like using a guy, say like Darren O'Day or even Colin McHugh, would have been more the route I would have gone, regardless of it being a lefty-lefty matchup or a reverse splits matchup or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely say Snicker mismanagement. I mean, let's call it what it is. He did, and that's okay. I thought he outmanaged Dave Roberts by miles in the postseason with the way he managed the pitching staff. So, this is not an indictment. It's one maybe mistake I think that he made. And me and you talked about it, I think, off postcast, who we would have brought in. I think we both said O'Day pretty much at the same time. That just seemed like the obvious choice. Again, understand the reasoning, lefty-lefty matchup, but I just trust O'Day more in that spot right now. And he's a guy that you can kind of just use at any point throughout the game. And I think it was also frustrating too, because Snicker's comments after Sunday's game, talking about what Strider did, like you mentioned, and saying the bullpen will be completely rested and fresh and ready for this series. And the first time you go to the bullpen in a 3-0 game, you bring in Sean Newcomb. So
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of the frustration lies here as well.
Yeah, and I understand that. I mean, if you're stacking up your bullpen, you got 8 or 9 relievers, 10 relievers, whatever it is now with these expanded rosters. Sean Newcomb is not one of the top names that you're going to call. I think it's one of those moves where if it works out, you look like a genius. When it doesn't work, there's a lot of I told you so built into this because as we know from watching enough baseball games, and as most people know, we get the benefit of talking about all of this in hindsight. Who knows how the matchup would have gone for somebody else, but it just didn't feel like you put it in the best hands because there's just
Right.
not a long track record of success with a guy like Sean Newcomb, who was a useful reliever in 2019. But yeah, the last couple of years, he's really been struggling to find a role. And clearly, he's going to be searching even more so for that at this point. It just seemed like there was a better option. But in the middle of April, I have a hard time getting too upset about bullpen mismanagement. But the games that you win or lose in April count just as much as the ones that you win or lose in September, leading into the stretch run and all of those things. So it's frustrating. And losing to a team like the Dodgers on a night where you feel like you still had a chance to be in that game, and as it turned out, the offense was able to turn it on. I understand the frustrations there for sure.
Yep, absolutely. All right, next question comes from 1D Junior 10 L1D on Twitter says Duvall is looking like a lockdown center fielder, which is a huge plus, and Arcia is doing good with the bat and defense. Is there a point when Acuna comes back that Arcia and Rosario could share time in the outfield, or even Arcia take over the spot while he is hitting well? And Grant, I've gotten this question a couple of times now, talking about Rosario, and I know he's off to the slow start and people are asking, could he lose his job? I think there's a pretty obvious answer to this one, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you just signed Eddie Rosario to a 2-year deal, and he's kind of a guy that you're looking upon to get the bulk of the playing time as the Braves rotate their outfielders. But when Ronald Acuna Jr. gets back, I think a lot of different pressures and problems are going to be solved organically. You're going to figure out, what you need to in the lineup by putting Ronald at the top, and then Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Marcelo Zuna. You can slot Ozzy Albies down a little bit more. Adam Duvall, Travis d'Arnaud will be in the middle of the lineup somewhere. Dansby Swanson is not going to hit like this all year long, just based on his track record. He has been a streaky player, but he just happens to be in one of the lows right now. And I think having Arcia is a useful player, but not a guy who's got a big major league track record of doing a lot of things that would make you feel like he needs to be playing a corner outfield position. And I don't think they're going to make any kind of drastic change other than maybe giving him the occasional matchup start like they did the other night, because he had success in his career against Walker Buehler. And what did he do? He had 3, nearly 4 hits on that night. And I think that's great. And there may be days at this point where if Dansby needs a breather, you play Arcia at shortstop. If Austin Riley needs a breather, you play him at third base. That's, I feel like, is more of his role. It's great that he's hitting, 300 or above. I'm not sure what he fell to after the Wednesday finale, but this is a very small sample size. And that's one thing I think you got to keep in mind. Arcia's overall career trajectory and the numbers kind of speak for themselves. He's not a guy I think you're looking to find more playing time than someone who's done as much as Eddie Rosario did with Minnesota, and certainly did as much as he did in Atlanta to earn a multi-year deal. I think it's just early on, and when you come out of the gate and struggle, I think it gets more magnified than if this happens the third week of June.
Exactly. Yeah. Rosario's going to be in there just about every day. And the Braves need the left-handed bat, honestly. They need him to get going. They don't have enough lefties in this lineup already. So you just got to hope that he figures this out. Again, like you said, his track record tells you that he will at some point. But I think it's Rosario's job. It's nice to have Arcia as that utility backup guy if somebody does go down. And it's great, like you said, that he's swinging the bat well at the moment. This kind of goes in line, and I think you kind of already touched on it in your last answer, but Cajun Packer asked, will Snitker adjust the lineup once Acuna returns? Olson hasn't had many at-bats with runners on base, and maybe moving him to third in the lineup will help. So when Acuna comes back, how do you kind of see Snitker adjusting this lineup?
I really don't see Matt Olson moving out of the 2 spot, at least not in the early going. I think Freddie Freeman had a lot of success there, and clearly Matt Olson is the type of hitter that you want to replace a Freddie Freeman with if you have to. We've talked about that quite a bit, and I think Braves fans have probably heard as much as they want to hear about it. Olson is a guy that's able to get on base. It gives RBI opportunities to Austin Riley, who I think is really well suited to be the number 3 hitter in the lineup. If Marcelo Zuna continues to swing a hot bat the way that he has over the first couple of weeks and look more like the player that he's historically been, or the guy he was in 2020, that's the guy you want cleaning things up. And I just feel like Ronald at the top of the order sets a different tone. And as I mentioned about Dansby Swanson and Adam Duvall in particular, I think Travis d'Arnaud's off to a pretty good start. These are guys that they're going to hit their stride at some point. And once these things start to happen and you do get Ronald Acuna Jr. back, there'll be less of these 1 run on 3 hits kind of days and more of the home runs with guys on bases kind of days. And that's going to, I think, relieve a lot of the stress that Braves fans may be feeling early on, because you are missing the biggest and most important piece of your lineup. When he comes back, that changes the dynamic just in ways that I've said before are measurable and immeasurable because of what he means to this team and what he's going to bring upon getting back.
What I'm excited for when Ronnie comes back is Ozzy moving back down in the lineup. Look, I love Ozzy Albies. He's not a leadoff hitter, and I get it. The options are very slim right now. But you look at what he just did over this, last 5 or 6 game stretch, hitting 4 home runs, all solo home runs. You need him as that RBI producer in the 5, 6 spot in the lineup. I just think that's where he fits best. So that's one lineup move that I think Snitker will make, putting Ozzie back down in the lineup. And I think that just lengthens the lineup even more, gives you a good run producer down there behind the guys that are getting on base, and Olson, Ozuna, Riley, and then obviously Acuna once he comes back. So that's kind of how I see things shaking out. Acuna, Olson, Riley, Ozuna, Ozzie, Travis. That's a really good top 6 right there. So I can't wait for that lineup construction. I can't wait to have those lineup discussions once Ronald comes back. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and next when we come back, we'll answer some of your questions, including some questions on Dansby Swanson and some of the biggest surprises early on in the season. Before we do that, let me tell you about Blue Nile once again. Whether she prefers a statement piece or everyday subtle elegance, BlueNile.com has fine jewelry options for every mom. Shop high-quality classic diamond earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, or gemstone pendant necklaces. If you're looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Celebrating that special woman in your life on BlueNile.com, you can easily navigate thousands of fine jewelry options at every price point. And this Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off a $500 purchase. This podcast exclusive is only good through Mother's Day. Use the promo code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. Jumping back into the Twitter questions, Grant, this one coming from Andrew says, I know Swanson is a hot or not player, but do you think the Braves may use him as a trade candidate? If so, any thoughts on who they may go after? And I'll give you my quick thoughts, Grant, and then I'll pass it over to you. We kind of touched on it before we started recording. I just don't see them trading Dansby Swanson. He would have to hit like this for months for them to even consider demoting him from the position, much less trading him. And I don't really know what the value is in that. And I don't know, to answer the second question, I don't really know what you would replace him with right now. So those are kind of my just initial thoughts. But anything else on Dansby Swanson?
I mean, we don't know who's going to be available around the trade deadline, where the discussion could change if you're, rolling in there and Dansby Swanson sitting around a 625 OPS and striking out 40% of the time. At that point, yeah, I would be alarmed and I would want to upgrade this position. And the strikeouts right now, they are concerning. And I think that, Nick Green of Bally Sports, he did a great breakdown. I retweeted it earlier on about the differences between when Dansby was going so well last year and in recent years and what he's doing right now. And he's just not in sync yet. And he's a little behind. And clearly that's causing some strikeouts that may not be there normally. And it's clearly taken a bite out of his production. But it is still early in a very long season. I think Dansby Swanson's still an important player to this overall team dynamic. So I'd be very surprised to see him going anywhere for any reason other than if he's injured and you got to replace him, then clearly you got to make a call at that point. But trading him just to trade him, even with free agency looming, I wouldn't imagine the Braves would be in a position where they'd want to be trading away a Dansby Swanson unless they're so far out of it that they're selling. So there's a few different things that I would be alarmed by if Dansby Swanson got traded. A, where are the Braves as in terms of their place in the division? And then B, if Dansby Swanson is playing so poorly that they're trying to trade him away or dump him on another team, it's probably been a pretty rough season for him. The value is not going to be very high. So those are just a couple of things that spring to mind. But again, I would like to just preface all this by saying it is very early, and we are talking about a guy who's just been known historically to go through hot streaks and cold spells.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking at our internal options, like it's Orlando Arcia, who I know is everybody's fan favorite right now, but history tells us he is not that type of player over a full season when he was with the Brewers. Braden Shoemake, he's not ready at AAA, in my opinion, and certainly not ready to take over that shortstop position for a championship-winning team. And Vaughn Grissom's at least a year or so away. So the internal options just aren't there right now. as well. So you're gonna have to ride it out with Dansby. And like we've talked about, he's hot or cold. I believe he's going to get hot at some point. It's just unfortunate that he's starting the year in such an important year for him on a cold streak.
Yeah.
Next question comes from E. Goldie. Says, what has surprised you the most through the first 14 games of the season, both good surprises and bad surprises? I'll let you go first on this one, Grant.
I think the easy one, as far as bad surprises, I don't think we need to spend any more time on it. I'm surprised that Dansby Swanson has started out in this kind of a slump. That's certainly something to be a little bit concerned about at this point. But in terms of good surprises, I don't know if it gets much better than Kyle Wright, because even if you're the most hopeful and optimistic person for what he did in the World Series, you still wanted to see him come out and do it and deliver. In his first two starts, he has more than delivered. Sub 2 ERA. He is limiting hits. He has walked one batter and struck out 15. I mean, this was a big, big problem for Kyle Wright, was command and being able to not issue free passes in his previous stints in the major leagues. I think that his work in Gwinnett last year, whether he wanted to be there or not, whether it felt like he was just repeating the same lesson every year, I think he kind of cracked the code. And I've been really fascinated to see the changes he's made, and thinking about a pitcher like him with his kind of arsenal, deciding to go back to what made him so successful at Vanderbilt, but also having a guy like Charlie Morton, who's a very similar style of pitcher, to kind of not just mentor him, but also you can learn a lot just by watching. And I feel like Kyle Wright has absorbed a lot there. So my biggest and best surprise probably doesn't surprise anybody. It's Kyle Wright. My biggest surprise or concern has been the play of Dansby Swanson. And as we've documented several times, I do think that will change.
Yeah, and since you took the best ones there, that's probably what I would have gone with. I'll say Adam Duvall on the disappointment side then, just because you look at his strikeout totals, and that's just as bad as Dansby. I know he had some big hits in that San Diego series, kind of saving him right now. But outside of that, he has not looked great either. He's been solid in center field. I know L1D mentioned it earlier. I think he is solid out there. I don't really want him out there every day. I prefer him in a corner spot, but he's at least, manning the position well. I don't think it's definitely not a negative out there for the Braves, but offensively, the strikeouts are just highly concerning right now. And then I'll go on the positive. I'll also go on the pitching side of things. Although we could go Matt Olson. He has been, highly a good. I wouldn't. It's not really a surprise though. I guess we kind of knew it, but to the level that he's playing, that is just highly surprising. Coming to a new team, a new environment, a new league, a whole different set of pitchers to have to learn. Yes, the start Matt Olson's gotten off to is definitely a nice surprise. But, the pitching too, and you mentioned Kyle Wright and what he has done. It's just been really great to see. And you talked about it. We didn't know what to expect from him. And, it's been nice to see. And I'm really just excited for him. I like what you talked about, him going down to Gwinnett. A guy that's been up and down, and here he is back in Gwinnett. Could have very easily just kind of, sunk his shoulders and not really put the work in, but he did. So I'm so excited to have him coming back. Spencer Strider's been a really nice surprise as well. Certainly in the rotation, he and Bryce Elder too. Definitely have been some nice surprises that have stepped up. So some really good surprises on the pitching staff here and there. And then obviously, Matt Olson, and I'll say, all right, now I got a lot of them now that I keep thinking about it, but Austin Riley, and again, this is not a surprise, but it's the fact that he is looking like the Austin Riley we saw all of last year. And, I needed to see it again just to believe it. And he's still, having good at bats. He loses it here and there in a couple of at bats. He's still chasing some of those bad pitches down and away out of the zone. But for the most part, he looks like the MVP caliber Austin Riley we saw last year, and that is certainly a very welcome and nice surprise.
Yeah, and if I can just add a tag on that real quick, I mean, I think everybody out there was thrilled to see what Austin Riley did last year, and that breakout, I mean, it was real. It was sustainable. You started sifting through all of the numbers and in terms of, what he had done. You knew that this was more than just his hot streak when he came up to the big leagues and nobody could figure out how to get him out for 4 weeks. He was sustaining that success, and it was a huge, huge testament to the work that he put in, to refining his approach at the plate, and he's carried that right over. These opposite field hits make me feel really strongly that this is a guy that has arrived, and this is now who he is, and his ability to draw more walks. We saw that take a big uptick in 2021, and here in 2022, he continues to do that. he's going to be a guy that's going to strike out because he's got big power. And, it's not surprising to see guys like that come with their fair share of strikeouts. But this is a tough league with tough pitchers with big velocities and better breaking balls than have ever been happening in the game of baseball. So to consider what he's been able to do and the fact that he was able to, really put it all together, Braves fans should feel pretty good about that. He has been a wonderful surprise, and I hope it's one that is going to be man in the hot corner for a long, long time to come.
Yeah, and congrats to him as well. He is on paternity leave right now
Yes.
with the birth of his first child. Certainly missed in the Braves lineup, but exactly where he needs to be right now. Got a couple more questions I want to get to. Before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Two more questions here before we wrap things up. Next one coming from Daniel Hodges says, do the Mets worry you at all? And do you believe that AA will try to trade for a starting pitcher? And is there a possibility that AA tries to trade for a long-term position at shortstop or just waits till free agency? We already kind of covered those second two questions there. I primarily want to focus on the Mets here, who are off to a really great start, Grant. And, I'll pose the question to you. Do the Mets worry you?
Yeah, I think that we knew the Mets were going to be improved this year because of the amount of money and the type of players that they brought in, and the fact that they already had some incumbent talent that had kind of underperformed or been injured. And we're not going to see Jacob DeGrom for a while, so it's crazy to think about the Mets being as scary as they are right now, or could be. Long term, we got to see. I think them continue to do it, and then figure out what happens when we turn the calendar to the month of August, because that seemed to be when things went bad for him last year. But Francisco Lindor is a better player than he was in his early Mets tenure. I think he's starting to flash some of that. You go out, you make some big free agent signings, you strengthen your rotation, you bring in a Max Scherzer, a Starling Marte. I mean, the Mets are a club, and I think that bringing in a new manager with a more clear voice and a guy that has done this stuff before and may have just been the kind of leader that the Mets didn't have at the helm in Buck Showalter, like, these are all very savvy and important moves. And this is the club, I feel like, that has a lot to prove to itself and its own fan base, but has as much, claim to stake in the National League East, given the kind of money they spent, where their payroll is, and the kind of talent they brought in. So I think the Mets, and we'll find out if they'll be legit or if they'll kind of succumb to what appears to be self-inflicted wounds a lot of years, but they're going to be tough, I think, this year. I think they're the number one threat. I think the Phillies are a little bit behind that. Marlins are certainly a team that's got some talent. And then I don't think we're expecting a lot out of the Nationals, in terms of making the division race, but they could certainly cause some trouble for somebody. In terms of Anthopoulos and down the trade deadline, making some other deals, I don't see shortstop being a place to add to. And I've been saying since the winter, I would really like to see the Braves go out and get another proven starting pitcher to plug into the rotation, regardless of whether he's a front of the rotation type guy in a blockbuster trade or just somebody that makes the club better in the third, fourth, fifth spot in the rotation as you strengthen yourself, hopefully, for a run through October.
Yeah, that's kind of been my point throughout the offseason as well. Would love to get another starter, another veteran starter, just to help some of these young guys that, aren't going to throw 170, 75 innings. So to have somebody else like that would be big. Doesn't have to be a front of the rotation starter. And then, like you said, somebody in that third, fourth, even fifth spot, just to help out with some of those innings, give you quality innings as well. But going back to the Mets, look, the Mets don't worry me until we get to August. You talked about their history and what they've done. They've had good starts before and kind of fizzled out. But again, like I talked about during the offseason, and like Grant just mentioned, the moves they made this offseason were different. These were smart moves. They were good baseball moves. Starling Marte is a very good baseball player. Mark Canha is a very good baseball player. Eduardo Escobar is a very good baseball player. They're not just spending stupid money here, like the Philadelphia Phillies have talked about and done.
Yeah.
These were really good moves to improve a club and to fill holes, like you said, to build around a foundation that was already there with this Mets club. So they are going to be very good. They're going to be the top threat for the Braves in this division. And I can't wait to see what happens when these two teams meet up next week in what will be a 4-game series with a doubleheader mixed in there. Still hoping they bring back Ronald Acuna Jr. early for that series. But that'll be a good first test to see how these two teams match up. And again, like you said, Jacob deGrom's not even there right now. So they're a good team. They're certainly going to be good. But right now, I'm mainly just focused on the Braves. And if they play their game, they play to their potential, I still feel like they're the best team in the division. They just got to start doing that. They can't wait until August to do that this year because the Mets are that good. They are that improved, and they won't let up. They won't let you in the race like they did last year and let the Braves come back. So that's the only thing I'm really focused on right now. I'm not worried about the Mets necessarily. I know they're going to be good, but I know if the Braves play their game, they'll be just as good, if not better.
Yeah, and I think that's the message Brian Snitker sends to a man is we're going to take care of our own house. We're going to go out there and we're going to try to win a baseball game every day. We're going to try to win series on a regular basis. And if we do all of that, we'll be where we're supposed to be. And you can't spend a bunch of time, looking in the paper to read box scores or checking out the out of town scoreboard, between innings. They're going to focus on what they need to. But this is a much better Mets team this year in terms of the talent, in terms of the payroll, and in terms of the expectation. I think Steve Cohen has gone ahead and turned it up to 11.
Yeah. All right, final question for this podcast episode. Chris Shaffey says, is Spencer Strider a better candidate to get a starting position spot than Tukey? How do you see the Braves doing in their next few series? So, Grant, I'll go to you first. I know Tukey's been called up. We've obviously seen Spencer Strider. How do you see Snitker? I mean, he's already said he wants to stick with a 6-man rotation. How do you see him filling out that 6-man rotation this next time through?
I think that with the couple of off days that are coming up as the Braves go into this homestand, they can kind of go back into a 5-man rotation look. They're not as, it's not as necessary as it was when you got 14 games in 14 days after I don't even know if you played 14 exhibitions prior to that because of the shortened spring training. Uh, I think Spencer Strider's done enough to earn a spot in the rotation or at least a shot at one of those should they call upon him. Clearly, Huascar Ynoa got a couple of goes at it, and neither one of them went very well. And now he's going to have to go down to Gwinnett and figure things out. We've seen Touki Toussaint over the years. We've seen him have good starts. We have seen him have bad starts. His story is not altogether that much more different than Kyle Wright's has been, and it all has to do with consistency. And I think for Touki, just like Kyle Wright, it all is centered around fastball command, throwing strikes, getting ahead, and then being able to use a very impressive arsenal and one of the best curveballs in baseball, in my opinion, as a weapon to be able to get a lot of swings and misses. But it all has to do with setting up and being consistent and pounding the strike zone. If Touki Toussaint can do that, I'd be happy to see him get another opportunity to start games. But it's going to be interesting in terms of this numbers game when you do have those couple of guys. You've got Tucker Davidson. You've got Kyle Muller down in AAA as well. Huascar Ynoa, I don't think we've seen pitch in Atlanta for the final time this year. In what role could be the big question for him? And then, of course, if we get into July, August, maybe Mike Soroka's ready to come back. So there's a lot of different things in play with the last spot or two in the rotation. But in the short term, if you're asking, should Spencer Strider get a shot if they're going to stick with a 6-man? I definitely think he should. And I think that's one of the byproducts of using him as that long reliever is he has stayed stretched out. He's been throwing 60, 65, 70 pitches. I think he'd be up to the challenge.
Yeah, I do as well. Like you said, I think if they stick with the 6-man rotation, then I think he deserves a shot as that 6th starter. For me right now, it's Max, Charlie, Ian, Kyle, and Bryce. I think Bryce has done enough in his first couple of starts, even though I know his last one was kind of rough, but I was more impressed with the way that he kind of battled out of that and kept his team in the game as long as he was in there. So I think he deserves at least another shot or two in that 5th spot. And then again, like I said, if they stick with the 6-man rotation, then I think Strider at least deserves a shot there as well. But I do like him in that role that he is in, kind of piggybacking off a guy like Bryce Elder, who is probably not going to go 6 or 7 innings out there, but to be able to kind of have that bridge behind him. So I do like him there, but I think he has a tremendous upside as a starting pitcher. And like you said, stretched out to do so. And I think that's intentional because I think they do want to give him a shot in the rotation at some point.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would still like to see something from Kyle Muller. He's a kind of, I guess, maybe a personal favorite of mine. And I've always been a guy that has really liked Tuki Toussaint as well in terms of his stuff and in terms of that breaking ball and the fact that I think he has a role to play somewhere. And some of these arms that don't get their shot in rotation, you throw Waskari Noah in this mix as well. If the Braves are looking to grow some of their own pitchers, not just in rotation, but also in the bullpen, you got some pretty good candidates here. But it's fascinating to see what decisions will be made on, where some of these guys will be deployed. And of course, we don't know what kind of trades and deals could be around the corner or around the trade deadline that could make the Braves better. And using some of these guys as the pieces that might get players that the Braves certainly could do a lot with to win a fifth division and maybe repeat that whole World Series thing, because I think they had an awful lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to see that happen again. I think you're going to see a lot of these guys get a chance throughout the year. I think a lot of these guys will get used and get their opportunity for sure. I want to thank you again for all the great questions that you sent in. I want to thank Grant for jumping on the show to help answer a lot of these questions. And again, if I didn't get to yours in this episode, I will most likely get to it on Friday's episode as well, as we preview the upcoming series with the Miami Marlins. And you want to hear the postcast of that series with me and Grant McCauley, make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On Atlanta, Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube, so that you will see the postcast there. And that also will come into the Locked On Braves podcast feed. So make sure you're subscribed there as well. But that will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at @LockedOn_Braves, so you can ask great questions like this to be answered on the show. Make sure that you follow me at Shortstop Ball. Follow Grant at Grant McCauley. And make sure that you are subscribed to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we will talk to you next time.